So now we're on to part 5 of reading The Hobbit, and we've made it to chapter 2, which is called Roast Mutton. And I still have my little key, and I found a lot of very relatable moments, but maybe that's the mood that I'm in. So when you're reading slowly, and you should always read for at least 20 minutes at a time, to think about and annotate. Sometimes it depends on what mood you're in that you're going to annotate with. So Bilbo discovered that they did leave him an invitation. They did leave, but with the expectation that he was going to join them at the inn a short time later. And so Gandalf showed up to encourage him along yet again. And now they've begun the adventure. And as sometimes once you commit, you have the excitement of the anticipation of the adventure, but now you've got to actually do the work. And it's not all fun every single time. So they've gone through this kind of gloomy days where they've had a lot of bad luck. The rain has continued. One of the horses spooked and lost a lot of food. But now they've seen a fire off in the distance, and they've decided that they're going to go check it out. So that settled it. After all, we have got a burglar with us, they said, and so they made off, leading their ponies with all due and proper caution in the direction of the light. They came to the hill and were soon in the wood. Up the hill they went, but there was no proper path to be seen, such as might lead to a house or a farm, and do what they could, and made a deal of rustling and crackling and creaking, and a good deal of grumbling and dratting as they went through the trees in the pitch dark. Suddenly the red light shone out a very bright through the tree trunks not far ahead. Now it's the burglar's turn, they said, meaning Bilbo. So Bilbo is getting some experience in actually how to be a burglar, their needs of a burglar before they get to the dragon's lair in the mountain. You must go on and find out all about that light and what it is for, and if all is perfectly safe and canny, said Thorin to the hobbit. Now scuttle off and come back quick, if all is well. If not, come back if you can. If you can't, hoot twice like a barn owl and once like a screech owl, and we will do what we can. Off Bilbo had to go before he could explain that he could not hoot even once like any kind of owl, and more than fly like a bat. But at any rate, hobbits can move quietly in woods, absolutely quietly. They take a pride in it, and Bilbo had sniffed more than once at what he called all this dwarvish racket as they went along, though I don't suppose you or I would notice anything at all on a windy night, not if the whole cavalcade had passed 2 feet off. So Bilbo's got a little bit of talent in moving quietly, and that's going to help him become who he needs to be. I don't suppose even a weasel would have stirred a whisker at it. So naturally, he got right up to the fire, for fire it was, without disturbing anyone, and this is what he saw. 3 very large persons sitting around a very large fire of beech logs. They were toasting mutton on long spits of wood and licking the gravy off their fingers. There was a fine, toothsome smell. Also, there was a barrel of good drink at hand, and they were drinking out of jugs. But they were trolls, obviously trolls. Even Bilbo, in spite of his sheltered life, could see that, from the great heavy faces of them, and their size, and the shape of their legs, not to mention their language, which was not drawing-room fashion at all. Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blimey if it don't look like mutton again tomorrow, said one of the trolls. Never a blinkin' bit of man-flesh have we had for long enough, said a second. "What the 'ell William was a-thinking o' bringing us to these parts at all? Beats me. And the drinkin' runnin' short. What's more," he said, jogging the elbow of William, who was taking a pull at his jug. William choked. "Shut your mouth," he said as soon as he could. "You can't expect folk to stop here forever just to be it by you and Bert. You've ate a village and a half between yer since we come down from the mountains. How much more do yer want? And time's been up our way. Wynyard have said, 'Thank yer, Bill, for a nice bit of fat valley mutton like what this is.'" He took a bite off a sheep's leg he was toasting and wiped his lips on his sleeve. "Yes, I'm afraid trolls do behave like that, even those with only one head each." After hearing all this, Bilbo ought to have done something at once. Either he should have gone back quietly and warned his friends that there were 3 fair-sized trolls at hand in a nasty mood, quite likely to try toasted dwarf or even pony for a change, or else he should have done a bit of good, quick burglaring. A really first-class and legendary burglar would at this point have picked the troll's pockets. It is nearly always worthwhile, if you can manage it, pinched the very mutton off the spits, purloined the beer, and walked off without their noticing him. Others, more practical but with less professional pride, would perhaps have stuck a dagger into each of them before they observed it. Then the night could have been spent cheerily. Bilbo knew it. He had read of a good many things he had never seen or done. He was very much alarmed, as well as disgusted. He wished himself 100 miles away, and yet somehow he could not go straight back to Thorin and company empty-handed. So he stood and hesitated in the shadows. Of the various burglaries proceedings he had heard of, picking the troll's pockets seemed the least difficult. So at last he crept behind a tree just behind William. It's a very sophisticated name for what seems to be a troll. Bert and Tom went off to the barrel. William was having another drink. Then Bilbo plugged up the courage and put his little hand in William's enormous pocket. There was a purse in it, as big as a bag to Bilbo. "Ha!" thought he, warming to his new work as he lifted it carefully out. "This is a beginning." It was. Trolls' purses are the mischief, and this was no exception. "Ur you," it squeaked as it left the pocket. And William turned round at once and grabbed Bilbo by the neck before he could duck behind the tree. "Blimey, Bert, look what I've copped," said William. "What is it?" said the others, coming up. "Lummy, if I knows. What are yer?" "Bilbo Baggins. A Hobbit," said poor Bilbo, shaking all over, wondering how to make owl noises before they throttled him. A Hobbit?" they said, a bit startled. Trolls are slow in the uptake, and mighty suspicious about anything new to them. "What's a Hobbit got to do with my pocket anyways?" said William. "And can yer cook 'em?" said Tom. "Yer can try," said Bert, picking up a skewer. "You wouldn't make more than a mouthful," said William, who had already had a fine supper, not when he was skinned and boned. "Perhaps there are more like him round about, and we might make a pie," said Bert. "Here you, are there any more of your sort a-sneaking in these here woods? You're a nasty little rabbit," he said, looking at the hobbit's furry feet. And he picked him up by the toes and shook him. "Yes, lots," said Bilbo, before he remembered not to give his friends away. "No, not at all, not one," he said immediately afterwards. "What do yer mean?" said Bert, holding him right away up by the hair this time. "What I say," said Bilbo, gasping. "And please don't cook me, kind sirs. I am a good cook myself, and cook better than I cook, if you see what I mean. I'll cook beautifully for you, a perfectly beautiful breakfast for you, if only you won't have me for supper." "Poor little blighter," said William. He had already had as much supper as he could hold. Also, he had had lots of beer. Poor little blighter, let him go. Not till he says what he means by lots and none at all, said Bert. I don't want to have me throat cut in me sleep. Hold his toes in the fire till he talks. I won't have it, said William. I caught him anyway. You're a fat fool, William, said Bert, as I've said afore this evening. And you're a lout. And I won't take that from you, Bill Huggins, said Bert, and he puts his fist in William's eye. Then there was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wits left when Bert dropped him on the ground to scramble out of the way of their feet before they were fighting like dogs, and calling one another all sorts of perfectly true and applicable names in very loud voices. Soon they were locked in one another's arms, and rolling nearly into the fire, kicking and thumping, while Tom whacked at them both with a branch to bring them to their senses. And that, of course, only made them madder than ever. So Bilbo's been captured. He wasn't a very successful burglar. You have to think about what Thorin and them will think about having to rescue him because he couldn't even complete his job. That would have been the time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little feet had been very squashed in Bert's big paw, and he had no breath in his body, and his head was going round. So there he lay for a while panting, just outside the circle of firelight. Right in the middle of the fight came up Balin. The dwarves had heard noises from a distance, and after waiting for some time for Bilbo to come back, or to hoot like an owl, they started off one by one to creep towards the light as quietly as they could. No sooner did Tom see Balin come into the light than he gave an awful howl. Trolls simply detest the very sight of dwarves uncooked. Bert and Bill stopped fighting immediately, and, "A sack, Tom, quick," they said before Balin, who was wondering where all this commotion Bilbo was, knew what was happening. A sack was over his head, and he was down. "There's more to come yet," said Tom, "or I'm mighty mistook. Lots and none at all it is." He said, "No burr hobbits, but lots of these here dwarves. That's about the shape of it." "I reckon you're right," said Bert, "and we'd best get out of the light." And so they did, with sacks in their hands that they used for carrying off mutton and other plunder. They waited in the shadows, and each dwarf came up and looked at the fire and the spilled jugs and the gnawed mutton in surprise. Pop! Went a nasty, smelly sack over his head, and he was down. Soon Dwalin lay by Balin, and Fili and Kili together, and Dori and Nori and Ori all in a heap, and Oin and Gloin and Bilfor and Bofor and Boromor piled uncomfortably near the fire. "That'll teach them," said Tom, for Bilfor and Boromor had given a lot of trouble and fought like mad, as dwarves will when cornered. Somehow I thought they'd put up a better fight. Thorin came last, and he was not caught unawares. He came expecting mischief, and didn't need to see his friend's legs sticking out of sacks to tell him that things were not all well. He stood outside in the shadows some way off, and said, "What's all this trouble? Who has been knocking my people about?" I thought for a moment that it was going to be Gandalf up there on the hill with the fire. I wasn't expecting trolls. "It's trolls," said Bilbo from behind a tree. "They had forgotten all about him. They're hiding in the bushes with sacks," said he. "Oh, are they?" said Thorin, and he jumped forward to the fire before they could leap on him. He caught up a big branch, all on fire at one end, and Bert got that end in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught hold of Tom's leg as well as he could. It was thick as a young tree trunk, but he was sent spinning up into the top of some bushes when Tom kicked the sparks up in Thorin's face. Tom got the branch in his teeth for that and lost one of the front ones. It made him howl, I can tell you. But just at that moment, William came up behind and popped a sack right over Thorin's head and down to his toes, and so the fight ended. A nice pickle they were all in now, all neatly tied up in sacks, with 3 angry trolls and 2 with burns and bashes to remember, sitting by them, arguing whether they should roast them slowly, or mince them fine and boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squash them into jelly. And Bilbo up in a bush, with his clothes and skin torn, not daring to move for fear they should hear him. So now Bilbo's the last one, the last available help for them. It was just then that Gandalf came back, but no one saw him. The trolls had just decided to roast the dwarves now and eat them later. That was Bert's idea, and after a lot of argument, they had all agreed to it. "No good roasting 'em now, it'll take all night," said a voice. Bert thought it was William's. "Don't start the argument all over again, Bill," he said, "or it will take all night." "Who's arguing?" said William, who thought it was Bert that had spoken. "You are," said Bert. "You're a liar," said William, and so the argument began all over again. In the end, they decided to mince them fine and boil them. So they got a black pot and they took out their knives. "No good boiling 'em. We ain't got no water, and it's a long way to the well and all," said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom's. "Shut up," they said, "or we'll never have done, and you can fetch the water yourself, if you're say any more." "Shut up yourself," said Tom, who thought it was William's voice. "Who's arguing but you, I'd like to know?" "You're a booby," said William. "Booby yourself," said Tom. And so the argument began all over again and went on hotter than ever until at last they decided to sit on the sacks, one by one, and squash them and boil them next time. "Who shall we sit on first?" said the voice. "Better sit on the last fellow first," said Bert, whose eye had been damaged by Thorin. He thought Tom was talking. "Don't talk to yourself," said Tom. "But if you wants to sit on the last one, sit on him. Which is he?" "The one with the yellow stockings," said Bert. "Nonsense. The one with the gray stockings," said a voice like William's. "I made sure it was yellow," said Bert. "Yellow it was," said William. "Then what did you say it was gray for?" said Bert. "I never did. Tom said it." "That I never did," said Tom. "It was you." 2 to 1, so shut your mouth," said Bert. "Who are you a-talking to?" said William. "Now stop it," said Tom and Bert together. "The night's getting on, and dawn comes early. Let's get on with it." "Dawn take you all, and be stoned to you," said a voice that sounded like William's. But it wasn't, for just at that moment, the lights came over the hill, and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he stood, turned to stone as he stooped, and Bert and Tom were stuck like rocks as they looked at him. And there they stand to this day, all alone, unless the birds perch on them. For trolls, as you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of the mountains they are made of, and never move again. That is what happened to Bert and Tom and William. "Excellent," said Gandalf, as he stepped from behind a tree and helped Bilbo to climb down out of a thorn bush. Then Bilbo understood. It was the wizard's voice that had kept the trolls bickering and quarreling until the light came and made an end of them. The next thing was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarves. They were nearly suffocated and very annoyed. They had not all enjoyed lying there listening to the trolls making plans for roasting them and squashing them and mincing them. They had to hear Bilbo's account of what had happened to him twice over before they were satisfied. "Silly time to go practicing pinching and pocket-picking," said Boromir, "when what we wanted was fire and food. And that's just what you wouldn't have got out of those fellows without a struggle at any case," said Gandalf. "Anyhow, you are wasting time now. Don't you realize that the trolls must have a cave or a hole dug somewhere near to hide from the sun in? We must look into it." They searched about and soon found the marks of trolls' stony boots going away through the trees. They followed the tracks up a hill until, hidden by bushes, they came on a big door of stone leading to a cave. But they could not open it, not though they all pushed while Gandalf tried various incantations. "Would this be any good?" asked Bilbo when they were getting tired and angry. "I found it on the ground where the trolls had their fight." He held out a largest key, though no doubt William had thought it very small and secret. It must have fallen out of his pocket, very luckily, before he was turned to stone. "Why on earth didn't you mention it before?" they cried. Gandalf grabbed it and fitted it into the keyhole. Then the stone door swung back with one big push, and they all went inside. So, I think I had quite forgotten that trolls turn to stone in the sun. Gandalf kind of used that time against them. And then they all tried to work to open the door when Bilbo was holding the key the entire time. Oh, I ended on page 53. So I ended on page 53 at the very top.